I'll get you to talk.
This is the cancelled Seven Dwarfs movie, a 3D animated spin-off which was set to be a prequel to the original Snow White, with plans to give Dopey a tragic backstory that was akin to Lord of the Rings. Okay. Long before we got a movie that seemed to have sort of two versions of these iconic characters pop up in possibly one of the worst of the Disney live-action remakes, which is one hell of an achievement by itself, this was the plan. And when I say long ago, you'd be forgiven based on the footage that this may well have been once Disney had their CGI movies rolling in the Frozen/Wreck-It Ralph era, because especially for the test footage, it seems like it visually fits in around there. But no, this movie was set for a 2006 release, and it wasn't a movie from the main Walt Disney animation department. No, it's our old friend Disneytoons behind this one, which does seem to sit weirdly in the timeline, because of course most of the straight-to-home sequels and prequels Disney put out in this era were traditionally animated. After all, they were meant to be following on from the original movies. However, on closer examination on what was going on come 2004-2005 Disney, you can start to paint a picture of why they were all of a sudden going for a CGI Seven Dwarfs movie. As we've covered in the past, Disney were taking their direct-to-video sausage machine in a bold new direction at this time. That being via making sequels to movies that didn't fully belong to them from a company who were otherwise saving their skin whilst their own movies weren't doing so hot. I'm of course talking about Pixar, with sequels to Toy Story and Monsters Inc. and Finding Nemo planned without their involvement. An event that genuinely almost destroyed their relationship, their biggest source of success at that time, and they almost threw it all out for a couple of DVD movies. That all considered, Disney's subsidiary studios were going to need the resources to start making CGI movies just like Walt Disney Animation Studios themselves. And judging by what they did actually release in 2006 in the form of Chicken Little, you can see the high standards of filmmaking they were having to follow there. Disneytoons needed to be 3D ready, and Seven Dwarfs may have been the first stop for that. Kinda symbolic in a way to have that as the first CG one, with the original Snow White being their first feature-length film, full stop. A sort of look at how far we have come, or haven't because we're doing the same movie again. But at least from the footage, it did look like they had something visually going on. Like from what we have, this is a really solid translation of those character designs. If they successfully redid the original with their 2010s art style, this is what they'd look like, though maybe a little bit less cartoony. I was already aware of this cancelled project's existence, but only recently some of the footage uploaded a few years ago found its way to me online that I thought actually justifies a full cancelled episode. There's the individual bits of concept footage, and then this concept trailer with all of it stitched together with a Snow White 2 title card. And it sort of complicates the narrative a bit, because this footage presents itself as Snow White 2 using the footage with some storyboards and a stock soundtrack. And I have honestly no idea what's from the actual leaked project and whether the rest of it was just edited together after the fact. I could definitely buy it as a proof of concept, maybe. However, the Snow White 2 edition is interesting, considering all the information points to this being a prequel, not a sequel, and also not being about Snow White. I mean, you can call a prequel Snow White 2 if you want to, but I'd wager, it's more than a little bit confusing. Having done further digging, that became a placeholder name later on towards the end of the project's life, so whatever. Anyway, the actual complete footage centers around Grumpy and Dopey, i.e. the two best known of the dwarves, I'd argue. The premise kind of being a simple classic cartoon, with Grumpy trying to get Dopey to talk. And depending on your take on the Dopey character, maybe that's continuing on an issue with the character that doesn't sit comfortably. At the very least, with that, the dwarves and the casting minefield that this property is, I'd still wager that they probably should have never bothered with the live action remake. Like, no one was going to be happy no matter what they did, and then you didn't actually have the grace to actually make a good movie. But anyway, back to this movie. The clip is charming enough, not really reinventing the wheel or anything, but it does its job as a proof of concept. Though not sure about Grumpy dressed as a cheerleader.
Yeah, Dopey, give me a D. Yeah.
However, it's a far cry from what the plot was supposedly going to be, as the plot was allegedly going to give Dopey a tragic backstory. Yep, according to a CBR article, the plan here was to, and I'm not joking, to capitalize on the success of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. That was the plan for this Disneytoons produced movie. I can see why they're all getting cancelled. They were looking to compete with Lord of the Rings. As for the story itself, the initial plan was to show how the dwarves all met each other, combining forces to trap an evil sorcerer into the magic mirror. I guess spoilers. Sorry. Which, if you've seen the wet fart of a self-referential movie, Wish, is actually partially an interesting plot detail. Especially with the dwarves involved as well, actually. Like, was that just an idea that never left the studio until now? Doomed to be cancelled, brought back, and then flopped in its own way. What a fate. It definitely feels like there must be some correlation between these two ideas, so I guess you could argue Disney's Wish is just a reincarnated version of this cancelled Dwarves movie. Nice. Unsurprisingly, from the test footage, Dopey and Grumpy were framed as the main characters, and you'd see their journey of meeting the others over the movie, through a fantasy setting called the Old Lands. Completely different to Middle-earth. Dopey and Grumpy live in a village with other dwarves until a series of accidents forced them to embark on a journey to the Old Lands. On their journey, they meet the 5 other dwarfs who join the adventure for their own reasons. The group is pursued by an evil wizard, leading them to meeting a beautifully young woman, Narcissa, a name as subtle as a high-vis jacket in foreshadowing that she's the evil queen. The dwarves bond with Narcissa, though she has certain traits suggesting she also has a darker side. The idea being this would have been highlighted through the dwarfs caring for her in a similar way to Snow White, which I think would have been particularly interesting. The group reaches the ancient city of Dwarfenholm, where a twist reveals the wizard is Narcissa's father, and they have been using the dwarfs to access the powers of the Olden Dwarf. And if that's not mad enough, the wizard that becomes the magic mirror is her dad. Alright. So canonically, she would be going up to her dad asking whether she's attractive. And then he says no, there is someone younger. Why doesn't she just go dad, dad on the wall, you know? Like, Narcissa betrays her father, causing his enslavement in the magic mirror. And from then on, he's just cool giving her compliments. Okay. However, with newfound magical powers, Narcissa turns on the dwarves in a kind of Anakin Skywalker sort of situation. Except instead of the dark side, she's left with the abilities to become an old lady and poison some apples. I know, some real Thanos level stuff we're talking about here. I can see why there are darker parts of the story, with a key character turning out to be evil by the end. Very much would be fitting in that kind of Disney twist villain approach. Why not retcon the first ever Disney villain to really bring things full circle? Apparently, there were even plans to have a self-sacrifice / fake death scene in the end with Dopey, before the film ends with Narcissa dethroning Snow White's father and becoming the evil queen, leading the dwarfs to hide and protect their families from her wrath. So not really a very happy ending, but it does kind of have to end where the first movie starts. As for that Dopey tragic backstory, well, that was going to be the death of his mother, traumatizing him not to speak. A development that was so harrowing that the original director attached left the project. To be fair, that's not the full story. There was also an executive pushing him to have Dopey talking, which I don't think he was really going for.
We're not afraid.
Based on the concept footage that completely relied on the contrary as a premise, with the proposed compromise being that there is this tragic backstory to why he doesn't talk. Director Mike Deesa didn't want to do either of those things, so he was out. According to an Animation Views article, the meeting became heated, with Deesa saying, "You're out of your f***ing mind. I am not walking into John Lasseter's office and pitching him the Dopey's Too Emotionally Scarred to Talk movie." Hey there, you made it to the halfway mark of this video. Come along and subscribe if you haven't already. Alright, cheers. Bye-bye. Off we go. You're out of your f***ing mind. What a quote. One of my favorites I think we've ever covered in the Cancel series. Because in the original footage he presumably oversaw, that was clearly not the vibe he was going for. And it gets even spicier when the executive who suggested all this then became the new director. There's some proper Succession stuff going on at the Mouse House in 2006. However, as dark as these proposed additions sounded, along with the tonally completely different concept footage with Grumpy as a cheerleader,
Give me a D.
apparently there was a lot of excitement circling this project behind the scenes, with a lot of these details added through other people contributing to the project. To the extent that the original director left, but still. It's been said that it even got to the point where staff workers at Disneytoon were sneaking copies of the screenplay to read for themselves. That's the kind of talk that always makes this kind of lost media particularly painful, when there was actually this much creative enthusiasm around it. Even if it is technically just Disney spin-off knockoff fanfiction. I doubt Lady and the Tramp 2, Scamp's Adventure, or 101 Dalmatians 2, Patch's London Adventure received that kind of enthusiasm down Disneytoon Central. That in mind, I'm pretty convinced that this would have been pushed for a full theatrical release like other Disneytoon movies had before it. That being a Goofy movie, Movie, Return to Neverland, and Jungle Book 2. The scope and ambition that was clearly behind the project just seemed like it might have been intended for more than just a straight-to-home movie. If Disney as a corporation hadn't completely reshaped itself around this time, that may well be how this production would have panned out. Sadly, a changing of the guards had other ideas. The movie, amongst a lot of the other Disneytoons projects, were cancelled following the Pixar merger that led to a lot of the Pixar team also in charge of Disney Animation, who, unsurprisingly, weren't too keen on the departments that tried to force through sequels to their movies, and the axe that fell on the Seven Dwarfs, all thanks to John Lasseter. Yep, that guy again. A man who'd find the axe falling on himself a decade later, after 10 years having a scary amount of power over the entire animation output, let alone his tendency to cuddle female colleagues with varying degrees of consent. He was the big boss of all animated content for the whole next wave of Disney animation, and it all started right here. They pitched the Seven Dwarfs directly to him, but he just outright shot it down there and then.
I'ma kill all you rappers, I'ma aim with precision.
Years of production, and it was just pulled in an instant by one guy. And considering Lasseter went through a very similar experience with a project of his in the 80s, you can't help but wonder if there was an air of cynicism behind this decision. However, as a company, I think it was always toast. Disney's entire approach as a corporation was seeing a huge shift at this time. Basically, anything with ties to the cheap home media era of Disney was seen as stale as this big overlap with Pixar happened. Kind of funny, this big move was to cancel all Disney sequels, considering where Disney is now. We'll spend a decade making new movies to make sequels too. It's like as soon as they've generated enough new original movies, they'll go right back to absolutely milking them for all they're worth. I just think there was an opportunity here to approach these legacy movies in a different way to straight sequels and the live-action remakes that we actually ended up getting. And considering the mass culling of Disneytoon projects was to reprioritize creativity and originality, it's just a shame a project that seemed to have those qualities in there was just grouped up with everything else. It just seems like a little bit of a missed opportunity, especially compared to what we actually got.
What did you think I was?
No!
Snow White is running for president.
Anyway, Disneytoons would get their chance at a CG animated legacy movie in the form of the Tinkerbell franchise, which actually did pretty well for them, particularly with toys and all the rest of it. I'm pretty sure one of them was even a theatrical release, so they did get back there in the end, along with those Planes movies, so they got their hands on some of those Pixar sequels in the end, I guess. What do you know? Of course, shortly after their masterwork, Planes, Fire and Rescue, the fact that it's named like a playset just makes the reason it exists not even subtle, Disney was shut down for good, as did a whole era of cash grab sequels put out at rapid pace. They just leave the main studio to do that now. Out of all of the Disneytoon projects we've covered, I think this one may well be the most enticing one in the sense that it could have actually been pretty good to the extent that Disney staff were nabbing the script so that they could read it. The Pixar ones are interesting what could have been in a sense that it's fun to speculate, but also thank God they didn't. This, on the other hand, may well have been a good movie that just didn't get its shot, which is a story we unfortunately see time and time again throughout the cancelled series we do on this channel. The hard fact is the majority of screenplays written never get made, and even the ones that see some motion still may never reach that finish line. In the case of the Seven Dwarfs, it just seems like they were victims of a corporate shakeup. And hey, maybe there were also concerns about the outdated connotations of the dwarves as well as Dopey. But I'd wager they would have gotten a lot less heat for this project than whatever the hell they were thinking with the live-action remake. A movie made to try and please everyone that just ended up being entertaining for no one. Keeping the dwarves in the context of the original movie's timelines and world would have just found a lot less complaints. In any case, I doubt we'll see this project resurface because I think they're just never touching the Snow White property ever again after this year. Probably should have been the approach before they made the movie, but you gotta learn some lessons the hard way, I guess. The dwarves did get one last hurrah in animation in the form of a TV series for Disney XD back in 2014, complete with the most Disney XD title you can find in the form of the 7D. That's right, these characters from 1937 are now down with the kids, and there were some choices made with their redesigns. I mean, wow. You thought the complete mess with the remake was a radical departure. There's a new animation style for DuckTales, and then there's this. These guys may as well be different characters, and perhaps that's the idea. I love the image of the creators getting a corporate mandate to a Seven Dwarfs series, telling them nothing, and then coming out on the other side with this look. Personally, I would have been interested to see the original character looks and costuming in this animation style, but hey, I haven't watched it. Was it any good? I looked at the cast list, and the Magic Mirror was voiced by Whoopi Goldberg of all people, as well as a fortune-telling crystal ball voiced voiced by Jay Leno. Okay. Feels like I could make a Conan joke here, but I'm just not the guy you come to for US late-night TV drama. The premise of the series is that the dwarves protect the land of Jollywood from threats such as the Glooms, who are apparently witches that I presume are the evil queen presence of this series. Oh, the Narcissa, sorry. It lasted 2 seasons, was criticized for being charmless and not having a clear target age group, had 2 online games based on its release, and then never heard of again. What a saga the Snow White property has been in a century. So there we go. After having their decent sounding movie cancelled, the dwarves instead ended up having a TV series where they looked completely different, and then 10 years later, a universally panned live action remake that seemingly has 2 versions of them because Disney tried to tiptoe around their issues rather than just not bothering with this damn project in the first place. Quite fitting, really. The remake of the first ever Disney movie is the one that may well have put an end to any future live action projects beyond Lilo and Stitch and Moana. What is clear is that Disney have had several phases of churning out a line of projects that have damaged their reputation, be it cheap animated sequels or live action remakes. Just with one era's crescendo being the cancellation of a Snow White project that should have happened and another that probably shouldn't have done. Once again, we find ourselves in the wrong timeline. But for now, I'll end it off there. My name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. What do you think? Would you have been interested to see the Lord of the Rings inspired Seven Dwarfs movie? Do you think it was as good as the creative team at Disney thought it would? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and more. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video, and I shall see you all in a little bit. Bye bye.
Talk, damn ya!